Hi dudes and dudettes. Illustrator number 3. So when we left you with part 2, we just finished looking at the Pathfinder and the different things you can do with that, creating interesting shapes. First thing I want to look at today in our third lesson is having a look at the transform options. Now obviously we can't get to them at the moment because I don't have any objects on my artboard. Basically looking at the transform options and the advantages of them in terms of allowing you to have complete control over how things change and move, moving them around the document, so on and so forth. So if I have a shape, and what I might do is just flick over so that we have only a stroke on my path. As you know, if I select that path, as we spoke about in lesson 1, it will bring up the little bounding box areas, so I can change the size of it here, or I can move sides in. You know, you guys get the drill. You understand all of that at this point. What I want to look at is moving things around exactly and transforming them exactly. And I won't spend too long on it, but if we go up to transform, you've got 5 options here, which I'll show very quickly, but also I want to talk about this transform again. So, for example, if we go to move, what it allows me to do is, if I wanted to move this object a precise amount, so if I knew that I wanted to move it exactly 50 millimeters horizontally, right, we'll just put 0 for our vertical. Distance only applies to angle, so if you want to move it a particular angle and a distance, you can do that. You can also check preview down here to see that in action. So what I might do is make it 150 so it moves a little more, right? And so you can see what I'm doing is simply moving the object. Really handy if you're doing things like packaging where you need to be very precise. For example, if I had made this, and if I was smart, I would have made this exactly 100. So let's go through and do that now. Right, so this square is now 100 millimeters by 100 millimeters. If I knew I needed to have, a line of these because I was making a package of some sort, I could go and I could say move, and I could move it exactly 100 millimeters horizontally. And so what that's going to do is move another one exactly 100 millimeters. Now, if I was to press OK at this point, it will just move it. But you've also got the option to press copy. And so what that's going to do is make a copy of the shape, the path, whatever it is you've got, move it as you've asked Illustrator to do, and make a copy of it. So if I press copy, you can see it will make a copy of that. And then I could then go into this one and say transform, move, blah, 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 100 millimeters, make a copy, so on and so forth. Now I know that these are perfectly aligned and they're all moving exactly 100 millimeters across. Other things we've got up here are the rotate. So obviously you're not going to notice a lot of difference with that with a square. Nice work, Andrew, well picked. But if we've got an ellipse, say, and we go up to our object, transform and rotate, you can rotate it exactly 35 degrees if you wanted to, or whatever, right? So you're just rotating the object exact amounts. And again, you've always got this option to copy. Next, we've got reflect. Why do I keep deleting that ellipse when it's a perfectly good thing to show you? So reflect, obviously, very quickly does what it says on the box. You can reflect it horizontally or vertically or at a particular angle. And again, you can press OK or you can copy. Next, we've got scale. So again, if you know that you need something, sorry, that was me holding down spacebar because I was trying to move the screen across. If you know that you've got, if I want to make this exactly 150%, then I can type in 150%. It's going to scale it up that exact amount. Keep in mind here with the scale, you can change scale strokes and effects on and off. So at the moment that's ticked off. So as this square increases 150%, the stroke stays at one point. If I had that ticked, then the stroke would increase also 150%. So keep that in mind if you're using this. again, this stuff's all about precise movement, precise manipulation, transforming, all that kind of stuff. Finally, there is shear. So you can shear things on particular angles, and I'll give you an example of what that looks like. You're just shearing the shape, squashing it, pushing it across, whatever. And again, you can pick the horizontal or the vertical axes to do that on. Lastly, I want to show you is up here with the transform is this transform again, the shortcut being Command D if you're on a Mac, and I think it's Control D on a PC, but don't quote me on that. Just check for yourself, guys. What that does is it will just transform the last thing that you transformed and do it again and again and again and again while you keep pressing it. So for example, when I was moving this 100 millimeters, we went up to Object, Move, we said 100 millimeters, I pressed copy, it made a copy of it, moved it 100 millimeters. If I now go Command D, which obviously you guys can't see me doing, but if you go to that transform again, you can see that it just continues to do that same function over and over and over again. So it comes in handy for things like if I have a line, right, and I want to, now if I was to rotate this line, it's going to rotate it on the center point at the shape, which would be here. If I duplicate this line by just dragging a copy, helps if you click the right shortcut, Andrew. If I drag a copy of this line and select them both and rotate, what it's now going to do is rotate them from this center point, obviously, because I have them both selected. So if I now go up to Object and I go to Rotate and I say let's rotate it 20 degrees, and we go Copy, and then I say the Transform Again function, it's just doing that same functionality over and over again, copying them and rotating them 20 degrees. So really useful if you're doing radial things like this. Okay, so that's the transform tools. Next thing I want to talk about is the stroke width tool. Really useful for if you're tracing sketches and things you've done by hand and you want to give things a little bit more of a natural, realistic look as opposed to that kind of harsh, sharp, perfect vector look. That's great for logos and things, the perfect vector look, but sometimes Illustrator can be a little bit cold, so this is a really good way of just making things a little bit more natural looking, I guess. So as you know, if I draw a line and I make that, let's make it 3-point, for example. If I have a line that has 3-point stroke applied to it, it is 3-point stroke here, it's 3-point stroke here, it's 3-point stroke everywhere along that line. And if I increase the stroke, it just increases all the way along that path or that line. What the width tool does, which is this little thing here when the computer wakes up, it looks like a dinosaur, it looks like a rooster, it looks like a jester's hat, a dragonfly. I've had people say it looks like all kinds of things. You can decide what you think it looks like. I personally think it looks like maybe a rooster, dinosaur. Anyway, that doesn't matter. So grab the width tool, and what that allows us to do is actually expand the stroke on particular points. So you can see now that at this point on the line, it is much wider, but it's still 3-point down here. And you can click on particular parts of your line and expand them out. Now you'll notice that as I do this, it mirrors on the other side. If you don't want that to happen, you simply hold down, sorry, I'm jumping between PCs and Macs too often. You hold down Alt or the Option key on a Mac, and I can't remember what that key is on a PC, but you guys can play around and find it. I'm sure you will, and you'll go, it's this key, idiot. So what that does is allow you to expand it on one side, and that's not reflected on the other. Now, this is still just considered a path, guys. It's not a shape. It is a line which has a crazy thing applied to it, right? But you can see that I can still manipulate this as I would a line, right? Because it is just a line with a really, really crazy stroke on it. You can at any point convert a stroke to a path by simply going to Object, Path, and outline stroke, and that will turn your stroke into a closed path. But keep in mind, once you do that, it's now a path. You can't manipulate it as a line. Just very quickly, a cool little thing that's useful with the width tool. Obviously, I was being extreme with it. You know, I was doing crazy things, but you can have subtle manipulation in your lines to add, you know, if you're doing a cool line drawing and you want thicker weight to show shadow or depth, or thinner areas to show highlights, you can do that with the width tool. It allows you just to draw a single path and create variation within that path. It's also really good for doing swirly things. So I'll show you that. We're going to look at brushes in my next tutorial because I'm going to wrap this one up very soon. But I'll just show you this quickly. If we have a line, as we had before, and I'll make it, let's just make it 2 point this time, and I'll go back to my 3 point. 3 is a good number. If I make one end of it thick, using my width tool, so all I've done here is just created a line which is thick at one end, thin at the other. What I might also do is round my edges. So remember, we looked at that in the first tutorial, just rounding the edges so they're not sharp, they've got a roundness to them. If I now drag this over and turn this into a brush, if it will let me, well, let's hide the options here and hopefully it'll let me, come on, there we go. If I drag this shape over as a brush, we just make it an art brush for now. Press OK. I will look at these options in the next tutorial, guys, but what we've now got basically is a brush that goes from thick to thin. So if I now go and I create, you know, swirly Maduvaluvies with my pencil or whatever, and okay, I shouldn't have done a loop there because I completely confused Illustrator. But you can see it's really good for doing, you know, cool spirally thingos like that, because essentially all you're doing is just creating a brush which goes from thick to thin. So, you know, if you're Tim Burton and you want to create really Tim Burton-esque stuff, there's a cheap and nasty way to do it. Ta-da! Or maybe tentacles. Maybe you love octopuses or octopi, and you just want to make lots of tentacles. That's how you can do it. Final thing for this tutorial is I just thought we would have a very quick look at gradients. You can see here you've got your gradients tool over here. You've also got gradients over here in your menus. So gradients can be applied to any shape. I'm just going to stick with my rectangle. Gradients can be applied as a fill or as a stroke. So keep that in mind. If I go up here and with this shape selected, I click on a gradient, the default is for it to go from white to black. Up the top, you can pick whether you want a linear or a radial gradient. A radial gradient just goes from the center to the outside. A radial gradient goes from one side to the other. This will allow you to pick the particular angle of the gradient, but I'll show you how you can manually do that in a second. Down here, obviously, is where you pick your gradient. You've got your gradient slider, which is where you can pick your colors. So you can double click on these little thumbnails. Am I working in? Yes, I'm working in grayscale. Very good. Double click on these little thumbnails and it will bring up a color picker like so. You can drag swatches down from here. So if you know you want to use particular swatches, you can drag those down and add them to the gradient. So I might just get rid of that and let's go from blue to green because they look good together. Not really, but anyway. So you can see I'm now going from blue to green. You can have as many colors as you want within your gradient. I wouldn't recommend that, but there you go. So at any point I can now double click on this and I can change these values. I can make them darker or lighter or, you know, put more yellow in or whatever, blah, blah, blah. This little dot up here is just the gradient slider. So you can modify how much of either color, and every time you put a new color in, you'll get another gradient slider. So if I was to have 3 colors in my gradient, you can see I've now got 2 of these sliders. I can change from the blue to the red and from the red to the yellow. Wow, that looks absolutely horrendous, doesn't it? Anyway, The gradient tool over here in your toolbox, that allows you just to manually pick the angle of your gradient. So where you first click is your left hand color, where you let go is your right hand color. I can click and drag like this, and I'm just manually manipulating the gradient like so. There is also within Illustrator a functionality for a gradient mesh, which is this thing. I won't go into that. That's fairly complex. Probably not something any of you guys doing screen and media would have to worry too much about. But essentially what it is, just to very quickly cover it, is it allows you to actually create like a grid, and you can add points to that grid, and you can add colors to those points. So rather than creating like a simple one color to another, what you actually are doing is creating areas of color, and you can then refine those areas and get really intricate with it, and people create amazing 3D artwork using gradient meshes. People far more talented than I am, as exhibited here by this beautiful thing that I've created. So that wraps up lesson number 3, guys. Hope you're enjoying them. Hope they're helping. That's what it's all about. I look forward to not really seeing you guys because, I can't see you, but look forward to meeting you again in the next tutorial. Thanks, guys. Bye.